Okay, I'd like to introduce a couple of gentlemen here on the phone with me. Uh, I'd like to introduce David Spinazzolo and Stephen Gianetti with Metropolitan Solutions. I first met David probably around the year, or made his acquaintance around 2000, and I really advocate lots of lenders to use their company. I know that some SBA lenders in the past have only used Metropolitan Solutions before. Um, David, how about if I start with you? Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, how long you guys have been in business, and where you guys operate?
Sure, Harold. First off, I want to thank you for having us. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk to you and talk a bit about the work we do. Metropolitan was started in 1986, and we first got involved in we were basically a niche operation at the time, doing primarily asbestos. And over the years, we grew and became a full-service environmental consulting firm. And in this process, we started doing the environmental site assessments. We started off in Virginia, in Portsmouth, Virginia. And ultimately, today, we are located in Portsmouth, San Diego, and the Seattle area in Bremerton. We have a national practice where we're doing site assessments all over the country. We really specialize in the SBA guaranteed lender programs. We know the SBA extremely well. And in addition to that, we also do laboratory testing. We have accredited laboratories, environmental accredited laboratories, which gives us a real advantage when laboratory testing is required as part of the environmental site assessment process. And we do environmental health and safety training and occupational health. That's kind of the overview of Metropolitan Solutions.
Excellent. Stephen, you want to tell us a bit about yourself, or Steve?
Sure. I've been with Metropolitan for 15 years now. I'm vice president and COO, concentrating in engineering, environmental engineering. Excuse me. We have developed this business unit nationwide. We use professional geologists. We have our own inspectors. As David mentioned, we have a training division. We train EPA and OSHA inspectors in our 3 locations and nationwide. And we use the best of those inspectors for the inspections on our properties. We have a very, very well-educated and well-experienced engineering group. And we break down the process in such a way that our turnaround time is 7 business days for a phase 1. So to echo what David has said, been in business for a long, long time, continuous operations, and no layoffs.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And that's one of the things that I've always liked about you, is that you guys have been prompt, and you've been what I thought in terms of knowing the market, knowing what's out there. You guys are very reasonably priced. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. And the purpose of this call was to assist a buyer, whether they were looking for financing or not, to be able to better assess a site that they're evaluating making a purchase, or maybe even constructing a site for, in that matter, because sometimes you're doing a raise and rebuild, or maybe there's vacant land, or maybe there's land there where there used to be a gas station. So if you'll just let me launch in a couple of my questions. First of all, what are the types of reports that you guys generate, and what are the normal costs associated with each of those?
Well,
David,
Harold, yeah, I'll start, and you just kick in on the more specifics. There are 3 basic reports. There's a risk RSRA, which is a record search and risk assessment. There's a transactional screening, TSA. Then there's a phase 1. And each one comes with different levels of due diligence, which of course has different levels of pricing. Steve, Matt, why don't you kind of describe what that is?
Sure. For the RSRA, that is a report that is prepared from all available information with government agencies. That's $500. We do a search through thousands of databases, and that takes 3 to 5 days, more around 3, but we ask for 3 to 5 in case we have hiccups in the data coming into us. Next is a transaction screen assessment. That's a TSA, and that's typically taking 5 days. Excuse me. That is a report that utilizes an on-site inspection. And then the next report is a phase 1. And that phase 1 is a very extensive investigation of the property. And that is $1,900. It's done under the auspices of professional geologists and a methodology termed ASTM. By doing ASTM, what we have done is created all applicable inquiry, and by providing all applicable inquiry to our clients in a court of law, they then have innocent landowner defense. So they get that innocent landowner defense with a phase 1, and the fee is roughly $1,900. And that's done within 7 to 10 business days. Some of the items that cause it to go up to 10 days is the lack of an owner providing the questionnaire, or the site contact not having time in their schedule for our inspectors. We identify an inspector within an hour of receiving the engagement from the client, and the inspector contacts the client within 24 hours to obtain the site contact information. That's our 3 reports.
I wanted to note something. I don't think you guys, since I've known you in 2000, you might have raised your price $100 on a phase 1, because I remember them being $1,800 back in 2000. Am I correct, David?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you it's not that way for appraisals. But so my next question is, would you guys review somebody else's phase 1 or 2 or 3? Do you guys review other companies' reports, and what are the charges for doing those?
Harold, that's a very good question. Yes, we do. Not only do we have only professional geologists, state licensed professional geologists, but the head of our compliance group was an underwriter and appraiser for 30 years. And we were lucky to be able to employ her about 2 years ago. We wanted to bring banking awareness into our process. So to answer your question, yes, we do review other people's, other companies' reports. Excuse me. Our fee for doing that is minimal. It's $250 to $300, depending on the size of the report. We ensure that one of the aspects of the review is a risk assessment to determine property being compatible with what the bank client, the borrower, is hoping to do.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was saying you are well.
Oh, okay. Do you guys, if let's say that you find that you're in your beginning phases of looking at a site, and all of a sudden, the very first minute you get on a state database for some DEP or DEQ, and all of a sudden you see a big problem. Do you guys communicate this like right up front or do you wait until you've done all your reports, or how is that communicated?
Oh, absolutely. We report issues that we see as soon as we do, and we call. By calling the client, that ensures there's rapid communication so that the client can go back to their client, the borrower, to determine whether the borrower has any thoughts, suggestions, is aware of any of those issues, and direct us in a different direction. Absolutely, communication is the key.
Harold, when you're doing this work, customer service is a real key thing for people. And when you define customer service, it's not the usual or the easy ones, like, for instance, turnaround. Having a quick turnaround is obviously important. But communication, problem solving. So we communicate with our clients, let them know their issues if there are issues, but we also give them options if options exist. So they can have a choice. It's not a binary thing with us where either it's good or you must have additional work like a phase 2. We think that's very important. We treat our customers as if, well, using the example, if our parents, mom and dad owned the property, what would we tell them? And that's really about the best way to give true customer service, where they're getting an honest idea of what they're getting into, and whether or not then they can make the decision whether or not they want to go forward.
And that's really important because, again, after doing this over 20 years, I was just remarking to you guys before we started this that the more I learn, the more I figure out that I don't know anything. So, and when you've done hundreds of these, and you still come to the conclusion that you don't know anything, well, you can pretty well assume that your contacts that you're dealing with, whether it's a realtor, whether it's a seller, business broker, whoever, you can probably reasonably assume they don't know anything, even though you're going to have someone that says, oh, this is clean, you can eat off it, there's no problems. And a lot of times what I have found is there's just open files. They're not necessarily an issue, but maybe there was a leak or spill or something, could have been decades ago, and it was never, I guess, marked urgent enough to either have something done, or maybe a site had been remediated, maybe it had been monitored, but again, the file just never closed out. And I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, but it just, some of these sites just weren't high on the priority list.
Harold, I would flip that around a bit in terms of the concern is not as much, I mean, from the owner's standpoint, they may say, oh, yes, the property is clean, you can eat off of it. But so often in our industry, what we find is people have to be careful that they don't fall victim to the upsell, if you will.
Sure.
Upsell meaning somebody looks at a property, they come in and they say, well, I think we have X and Y.
But we'll continue on here with the questions that we had. I had asked you prior about indemnification agreements, because if you have a situation where you've had a leak, spill, whatever on a site, and it's important, and as you know, especially doing the SBA loans, that if there's been an issue there, the SBA is going to be looking for an indemnification agreement, or it's probably not going to get done. Are you able to, in the scope of your investigations, find out if their indemnification agreements exist? And would that be listed in the phase 1 that you do?
Steve, you want to take that?
Or did I lose Steve?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
If we find a property that requires phase 2, Harold, your question was, is there an indemnification agreement? That broke up.
Yeah, I was just saying, is there a situation where when you're doing your investigations and you notice that there's been a leak, a spill on the site, and it is an open file, do you normally either look for, or is it normally available, who the responsible party is to pay for that cleanup if it's not being covered by a state lust fund or something like that?
Well, typically, when you get what's called the city directories, excuse me, those city directories show who the owners are and what the structure of the property was, the composition of the business, going back to 1940 or even earlier at times. And one can trace, going back, where the issue occurred, if it's a spill, if it's a reported leak, and that would help the borrower and of course the current owner to know who the responsible party would be, the owners, prior to them being involved.
Gotcha.
So yes, we do provide information assistance.
Okay. Let's pretend that I am an interested buyer. Because a lot of times I'll have people, they're not going to a realtor, they're not going to a business broker. They just go to a gas station or a convenience store where maybe somebody's owned it for a long time, and then just say, hey, if you're ever interested in selling this, let me know. And then maybe after they've owned it for 10, 15, 20 years and they're tired, or whatever the reason is for wanting to sell, let's say that I'm a buyer and I go into a gas station or a convenience store for the first time. What are the things that I'm going to want to look for and ask of the potential seller?
That's a good question. You would want to ask for their tank tightness tests. You would certainly want to know if the tanks are steel, single wall or double wall, or if they are fiberglass. If they are steel, you would want to know if cathodic protection is still in place. I need that, please. You would also want to know, Harold, are all of the state certifications in place? That's important.
Like what type of certifications?
Well, whatever the different states have different certifications, but any of the inspections that the states require, you would want to see those documents. You would want to see the latest tank tightness documents, as well as you would want to make sure that cathodic protection is in place. If the gas station that you're talking about has been closed and the power is still on, it helps the cathodic protection. If it has been turned off for more than 6 months or so, you may have a problem with cathodic protection not being active in the tanks. You would certainly want to, if they would do it, you would want to see their inventory record. Go back a year or two to see what they've purchased and what they've sold, and determine what the difference is between the two, and where did that gasoline or diesel fuel go. So those are just a couple of the things that you as a potential buyer could do.
This is a question that we did not discuss before. It's just occurring to me right now. Out of the things that come back when you guys do a phase one or anything more exhaustive than that, if you were to say, this is what we get the most, would you say it's leaks from an underground storage tank, it's leaks from dispensers from the lining under the pumps or the dispensers? Is it spills from the stage one vapor recovery system in the hose not working? Is it tanker spills? I mean, what would you say you get the most of when you get recognized environmental conditions or RECs?
That's a good question. From what we've seen, it's tanker spills. When you are filling the tanks, the majority of issues that we see are right in that area.
So here's my $1 million question. Why is the actual company that owns the tanker trucks? Because I was just looking at an image the other day of somebody that didn't, they left they left it neutral or something, and the tanker truck started rolling, and it pulled the hose out of the manhole cover, whatever those covers are called, and it was spilling fuel everywhere. And again, I know you're not attorneys, but why would the company that owns the tanker not ultimately be responsible instead of the gas station owner?
Well, I would suspect that might be an insurance question for that specific type of situation of damage.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there some things that I have not asked that you feel would be appropriate to include in this?
Oh, that's another good question.
Well, the one thing that might bear a little more emphasis is the innocent landowner defense. When the EPA came up with this, the question that was being discussed was, well, all right, you buy a property and somebody contaminated, somebody had a release several years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. Why should you be responsible? The EPA's answer was, well, you don't know who's responsible unless they have done due diligence. And that raised the question, well, what is due diligence? What constitutes that? And the EPA determined that it's a phase one and only a phase one, not a phase two, which is the follow-on. When you do a phase one and you believe you find evidence of a release, it generally winds up going into a phase two where you're going to drill, maybe put monitoring wells and things like that, and as you can imagine, that's very expensive. So the EPA says, you got to have another way where somebody who had nothing to do with that can escape liability. So the phase one, which requires a site inspection, a record search, a search of the history, interviews, and if you do that prior to your acquisition of the property, that preserves your innocent landowner defense. If you don't do it, then it doesn't make any difference. You're not afforded that protection. So that's really the innocent landowner defense segment of this is what gives everybody involved a bit of an insurance policy. So if you're a lender and you're trying to decide whether you want to lend money to a company or an individual to buy a gas station, then you'd like to know that they're not going to get hit later on with the cost of cleanup and discovery. Because you see, if you don't have innocent landowner defense, then you are responsible for the cost associated with discovering the contamination and the subsequent cleanup. So in the larger picture, it's a pretty good insurance policy to make sure you're out of the liability.
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. There's lots of things that we could talk about here. We've barely even discussed about state lust funds that are out there, and some are more robust than others. I've seen states run out of money when it came to that and things like that. So, but that'll probably have to be tabled for another discussion. But I appreciate you guys making yourself available. This is not necessarily a mystery to me, and I would honestly say that I'm barely competent when it comes to this. So I'm always going to defer to the professionals, and I've always had a high opinion of you guys, and so have many banks for that matter. So I appreciate you making yourself available, and I will leave your contact info or information in the content of the description in the video that I do. And again, thank you so much for taking your time to visit.
Well, thank you, Harold, for having us. We always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the industry.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve, too.